My name is Alice Billings. I live here in Ridgway. Most of you know me as the horse lady, and my last presentation I did, Ignite program, I did on horses. This time I'm going to do it on art, and I call it Daddy's Girl because my dad was also an artist. And here's a picture, another painting that he did. I have, the slides are, when we start them, are going to go by themselves. And I have some of his work, some of my work. And so that's it. Okay, wish I had a little more light here. Maybe I'll do this. I don't know.
So you can take the microphone out.
Okay. That might be better. Try not to use this. Okay, my dad was a bohemian living in Paris in the 1930s and experiencing the Paris salons with Picasso, Kandinsky, Miro, Gertrude Stein, and Alice B. Toklas, if you remember that name. It was a very rich and creative time. And while my dad was a bohemian in the 30s, I was a hippie in the 60s. Yes. Dad was very influenced by Picasso, and in fact, that was the time that abstract expressionism came to the forefront as a result, really, of Kandinsky. And you can see as the work progresses, oh, that's one of mine, though, you will see how he was influenced by that genre, and how my work actually is like his. In 1938, Dad was ready to come back to the States, but he couldn't afford to book passage on the steamer, and so he had to spend another year in Paris working as an illustrator and doing all kinds of work on publications to get enough money to come back to the United States. He often told me that his first sale as a professional artist was his overcoat to buy food. He came home in 1939 and met my mother in 1940 and married her, and his life as a vagabond bohemian went in a totally different direction. He had to make a living, so he became an art teacher in the high schools in New York City. This was the atmosphere that I grew up in. The stories my father told about the Paris salons, I don't know if any of them was true, but it certainly made for a colorful childhood. As you can see, he was influenced, as you can see, I was highly influenced by my dad's work, by color, by line, emotion, and I also became an art teacher following in his footsteps. His subject matter was not horses, as most of you know, mine is, but still the emotion and the cartoon-like quality that I actually have in my work. So the slides rolling by are a mix of my work and my dad's work. I remember the earliest memory I have was when I was 3 years old working side by side in his studio, and of course I was painting, he was painting, and as a 3-year-old, of course it was going to be abstract. That one was Aubrey Beardsley. Oops, we have a glitch here too. My dad always said that in order to abstract, you had to know how to draw, and he was an incredible draftsman. So when I was 16, he sent me to the famous or infamous Art Students League in New York City. So I went to high school Monday through Friday, and on Saturday I was at the league. It was quite an experience. Many fine artists honed their craft there, and I was thrown into the mix. At that time, you had to be 16 to take the anatomy classes because there were nude models. So my very first class, this model walks in, a male, nude, and let me say I was a very naive 16-year-old. I was there with my girlfriend, And she just turned beet red, and I said, "Nikki, just draw." Some of the things I learned from my dad: all things in moderation. Don't sweat the small stuff. Follow your heart and your passion. And I certainly have done that at this time of my life. I've united my 3 passions: education, art, and the horses. Don't take life too seriously. There's never any excuse for being rude. Be independent. Think creatively and out of the box and push those boundaries. When I was 30, my dad passed away. He always called me his sunshine. Well, if that were true, he clearly was my son. And today, while I'm still a hippie, as the country song goes, I'm just an old hippie. As many of you know, my passion are the horses. They not only define me as an artist, but as a human being. And I pass that along because I teach art in private lessons, and I teach horses. I don't want to say I teach riding, I do, but I teach about horses. So come on the journey with me and share in my history and continue my dad's legacy. Thank you. I just had to push the boundaries and have a few extra slides in the presentation. I just had to. So my dad did some biblical paintings, and but you can see the line, the color, the whimsy. That came from him, that came from Picasso. And you probably along the way saw that he was a very good draftsman, that portrait of my mother.
Oh my God.
And this is the end. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Okay.
Did you do art in school, during school?
Yes, I actually sub in the high school.
Yeah? Okay.
And then I teach privately at home. And I really, at this stage of the game, teach, and sometimes my students will just draw horses. We have the horses out there, and they go out there and they draw. And I try to get them to be more fluid, because as you know, young people, they want every little detail, and I try to loosen them up. So we use the horses in the art program, and while, as I said, I do teach riding, I really teach more about the equine consciousness and how you can relate to it and have a conversation with the horse and get feedback. So I have very loving horses, so come show up. And this is my website. I also have a nonprofit, Horse and Human Rescue. And I'm right here in Ridgway.
Yay, Ellen.
Yes. Thank you.